Workers with overuse injuries are overworked. They go to work, their tissues get stripped down, and they don't get a chance to recover, and the same exposure gets them injured that they've been doing their entire lives. And this is a personal story for me. As a disability case manager, I had the opportunity to listen to hundreds of stories of workers with the exact same story. And not only were they unable to go back to work, many of them did not. Simple joys such as gardening, playing a sport, or playing with their children or grandchildren became an impossibility. And this is not a one-off occurrence. 1 in 3 Canadian workers will suffer an overuse injury. And that causes direct costs to $4 billion a year in just industries and insurance alone. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because these workers are hurt, they need to be taken care of as well. That's a direct cost of $20 billion to healthcare. And that's a double whammy, because nurses get injured too, given the nature of their work, and other healthcare providers. So we have an issue of the skilled trades and nurses and other healthcare workers where there's already a labor shortage that exists in Canada. These shortages, for example, a roll of dice costs about $10 billion in the construction industry alone. And that's just within Canada. The global burden is $2.1 trillion. That's the Canadian GDP. And it's interesting to note that this history started about 100 years of rapid growth in the workforce. In 1911, Frederick Taylor developed a piecework system that standardized work but allowed workers, they were restrained in the way they were working. In 1925, Ford took this, Henry Ford, in his 9-to-5 workday, where workers weren't working as many hours, but they were working on the line and they had to work harder. So they were working harder and working in a constrained way, and that resulted in higher injuries, even though the quality of work was higher. So there was a need to understand these injuries. And in 1989, standards and regulations were proposed towards solving the problem, but there was not a lot of legislative change. However, in 2001, we seem to potentially have a solution where the US released a legislation to allow health and safety providers to enter workplaces, propose changes, and these companies had to enforce those changes. In the same year, it was repealed. And in 2021, the same company that led the charge in 1989 was defunded. That signaled a rapid deprioritization in resources towards solving that problem. Perhaps that rapid deprioritization was due to constant repeated failed efforts towards solving that issue. One example of that was worker training. Perhaps we can teach the worker how to move in a way that doesn't get them injured. However, this incorrectly shifts the onus onto the worker, where it could be that the work itself was designed in such a way they have to work in a way that gets them injured. Maybe we equip them with robotic exoskeletons, increase the capacity of the worker. However, these exoskeletons are big and clunky, and workers are working in confined spaces in variable work. That's where overuse injuries happen, particularly in skilled workforces where the work can be that controlled. As well, workers are potentially treating exoskeletons as a way to increase their capacity, which may get themselves injured in that way as well. Finally, by 2030, up to 800 million jobs are going to be replaced by AI and automation. Perhaps there's no overuse injury problems if there are no workers to get injured. However, it's extremely difficult to automate complex and skilled work. And that's where we see those problems are lying. So now we have a rapid deprioritization of the overuse injury problem. We have a skilled trade shortage, and we have a growing demand for skilled work. The overuse injury problem will only get worse. I'll leave you with this. Overuse injuries have never actually killed anyone. However, if there's something that exists that takes away your quality of life, I ask, what's the difference? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sanjay, for starting us off. So we'll start the Q&A round. I'm going to start.
Work changes from country to country. So based on those estimates, that's what we have.
Quick question, just to clarify, is the problem specifically workplace injuries or overuse injuries?
So workplace overuse injuries. So that's where we want to narrow the scope. So within work, workers are getting to the point where their bodies are being overused.
Right. So I guess further to Nabil's point, 2.1 trillion, is that all workplace injuries or overuse?
The question is about the scope of the problem. Can the audience hear the judge questions or not so much? Okay, I'll try. try and relay the questions. Sorry, can you say that?
I'll try to speak better.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just want some like more granular numbers if you have it on like specifically your topic of overuse injuries in the workplace. Is that the whole 2.1 trillion and all workplace injuries is much larger, or like I'm just trying to get a
So
sense?
the clarity on the scope of
Yeah.
your problem.
So that's a great question. The $2.1 trillion will include workplace-related injuries and injuries that were facilitated by your ADLs as well.
Okay, and then just one more quick one. Can you give any more quantitative value or metrics on how an overuse injury is classified? Like when does it fall into that bucket and not some other like root cause of that injury?
So when is something considered an overuse injury versus something else, right?
Particularly at work or in general? I can give both answers.
Yeah, like so for the overuse part in particular,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand like, you know, what is the threshold? How is that determined? Like what is the definition, I suppose, of that
Yeah.
classification?
What's the
correct.
definition of overuse injuries at the workplace or at
Yeah, so the overuse injury would be an example like a rotator cuff tear or a low back hernia. When the worker is working at work and they can no longer work, they're lifting a box and their back gives out. They get taken to the hospital, and whenever you're filing that insurance claim, you have to state what the injury was. In that case, there will be a low back injury or shoulder rotator cuff tears, for example, which were classified as rotator cuff tear or overuse injury.
As you identified the problem, how did you kind of separate the worker from the work design and investigate that part of the problem?
That's a great point. So I split it, yeah, that's an excellent question.
Did everybody hear that question? Separating the worker from the design.
Yeah, and I love that question as well, and it kept me up at night. What helped me is to split between very controlled work, repetitive, such as manufacturing, where the work is designed in such a way that it needs to be standardized, and then you have very variable work, such as, for example, a paramedic. They don't decide who they pick up, or a nurse, or someone working in the skilled trades. We may be building completely different buildings. So when you have more repetitive work, that's where the work design really becomes important, because how are we forcing workers to work? Think back in 1911 and 1925. Now when you think about variable work systems, like that's where the tools we equip the workers changes. That's where we would put more onus onto the worker and how do we help them.
Great. I think that's